Right, good afternoon, everybody. I make it 5 o'clock, which means that we can begin the meeting of the Cabinet on Wednesday, the 7th of February. Apologies for absence. I have absences from Councillor Costigan. I have an apology for lateness from Councillor Mahfouz, who I'm led to believe is moments away. I don't believe there are any others. So I don't have any urgent matters. As is always my warning on item 3, matters to be considered in private. There are, of course, gold papers which contain confidential information that relates to a number of items on the agenda. If any members wish to refer to any of the information contained in the gold papers, please do indicate to me in advance of doing so. To do so would mean that we would need to clear the gallery and to cease the broadcast of this meeting online. And as you can imagine, I'd therefore appreciate if people could avoid doing so unless absolutely required. But to make that known to me in advance of proceeding. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any, so we move to the minutes of the previous meeting, and I ask that they're agreed. We will then move to appointments to subcommittees and outside bodies, which I don't believe there are any. So we then move to item number 7, the 2023-24 quarter 3 budget monitoring report. Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak briefly to this, partly because I think by Q3 themes are generally quite well established for the financial year, and also because I think item 8 being on the agenda, by this point the Q3 report ends up as a kind of prequel to the bigger movie. But clearly, just briefly to say, as has been the case now for a long time, pressures in both adults and children's social care remain. I think two things I'll bring out. One is to welcome really quite significant progress that's beginning to be made in terms of processes in the adults areas to assist in helping to temper the continuing levels and expensive demand. So very welcome there, and thank you for that work to those who've been involved. And I think on the flip side, can see smaller numbers, but as a proportion, the pressures coming through in the other areas, economy and sustainability, housing and environment, reflecting the other pressures that we know exist outside of social care, and some of which represent even bigger challenges to councils in other parts of the country. So I'll leave it there and take any questions.
I believe there is a question from Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. If I could, it's 4.2.5. The final paragraph. Now it says additional management actions to reduce the level of overspend by year end, etc., etc. Are these going to actually have an effect by year end? What are they in a bit more detail, please? And are we not really talking about effect on what's going to happen in the forthcoming financial year? And the other question is 4.2.14. It's a slightly non sequitur paragraph, and you know it says and it tacks on and the wider economic impact on private sector landlords. Could you just explain that paragraph in a little bit more detail, please?
So just clarify that second number.
4.2.14.
4.2.1.24.
4.2.14.
Yes. All right, okay, got it.
Yeah. I'm often thrown when the numbering gets into double figures as well.
I know.
But on 4.2.5, I think the answer is immediate and longer term. On a range of measures, we know from across the sector, a number of councils, including councils in London, have had considerable overspends around the DSG. We've been much better at keeping our spend in check. Ironically, some of the most overspent councils got special dispensation from the government and got their debts paid off. So it wasn't necessarily a benefit in being good on this one. But I think across the whole range of spend areas, we're looking to, shall we say, as much prevent problems arising as to resolve them. On 4.2.14, the wider economic impact on private sector landlords. Well, I think we all understand that across the sector, we see that homes are landlords are taking homes out of circulation in the market, and that's creating, as if things weren't difficult enough, that's creating a further supply problem in terms of trying to resolve the kind of maelstrom, the perfect storm of issues around housing and accommodation that are going on.
Councillor Manro?
The issue is also landlords that were renting to the council because of the local housing allowance not being raised for many years. Landlords have been taking properties away from us when we lease them for 3 years or 5 years and going back into the private sector because the rents have increased. So that's making people that were in the private sector have to go back into bed and breakfast and commercial hotels. So that's an additional pressure that's causing on the council.
Thank you very much. Do I have any other points by Cabinet? If not, thank you, Councillor Donnelly, for the report. So I ask that members take note of the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to the 2024-25 budget strategy, medium-term financial strategy. Councillor Donnelly again.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's unusual in that, for the most part, this Cabinet doesn't decide on these things, but we decide to recommend and take to full council for its decision next month. And I'm happy to recommend the report and appendices detailed as they are on that basis. But as I presented to Overview and Scrutiny Committee last night, looking at it, I suppose, in 3 parts. There are the recommendations in terms of growth of expenditure in the key areas that are highlighted just before. There are the recommendations around savings and the other side of that coin, the increases in charges. But I think as important almost is the recommendations around the context and the approach that this administration is taking, and the need for us to move from simply providing for our community to assisting the community to do the things that it wants to do and to help each other to do. And I think we'll see more and more of initiatives of that kind will be key to how the administration moves forward, not just in the next financial year. It's always the case that the start of a financial year is almost an arbitrary date. There is a continuum in progress, and over the next few years, through the uncertainty of coming national elections and into the world beyond, we will be moving forward to build, as it says here, community resilience and community power. I feel I must make my usual comment about the absurdity of being asked to talk about a medium-term financial strategy in a world in which the government provides information about funding only on an annual basis, and where the damage to the economy that the government, with the various leaders that it's had, has caused over the last few years has resulted in damage to society, which has produced increased demand upon our services at the same time as the funding that we have available to deal with it continues to shrink. But on that basis, happy again to answer any questions.
And I do believe you have a question from Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Just it's a question, if I may, on the table 22 capital programme, page 80. And you have to forgive me if this is self-explanatory, but under resources for 24, 25, 253.453, and then which is a big bulge on what's predicted for the next few years. It's reprofiled underneath, and it sort of kicks back in 28, 29. Could you just sort of put a bit of flesh on those bones?
I've reached page 80. If you could repeat what the question was.
Could you just explain that? On page 80, it's 38 of the actual of the agenda item, and the line is resources in the capital programme resources 24-25. There's that large figure 253.453 reprofiled below and sort of kicking back in 28-29.
Sorry, forgive me. Which figure are you pointing to?
I think it's that it's very high.
Okay, I'm with you now. Yeah, that's the Broadway Living repayment loan. So that's the scheduling and around that. Thank you.
Yeah, it might be worth just bringing in our Section 151 officer just to set that out very clearly.
Yeah, but that Councillor Donnelly is correct. So the big numbers moving in and out are in relation to the total BLRP facility. So we've agreed a total facility with BLRP of 400 million initially. However, we haven't agreed to actually loan them on specific schemes 400 million yet. As you'll be aware, because of the wider economic circumstances, that programme has been delayed. So we've put more of that back. At the moment, we don't have a detailed plan for the rest of that 400 million. So we've pushed that back to the end of that period. So that may well be reprofiled again as we go through it. But at this present time, we don't expect to be loaning 400 million to BLRP, that we've got a total agreed facility. And as we have proper business cases and we're satisfied that we can give those loans, that will profile out onto time. So at the moment, previously there was a historic expectation that we will have got the 400 million out within the next few years. The economic circumstances have changed, and this is trying to reflect that.
And I think it's worth stressing, for the avoidance of doubt, that the prudence of the administration on our capital programme is such that, given the economic headwinds that we've faced in the development world, the Broadway Living programme for development has, unfortunately, significantly slowed down. That, of course, means we're being prudent and cautious about the decisions that we take, but it equally underscores the point that anything in the capital programme, as it stands, could well come out. And if we should decide in future to not proceed with capital schemes on the basis that they're no longer viable, then of course we will not proceed with those schemes. But the money written into the budget as it stands needs to be dealt with. And I think that's an incredibly important point. And I wouldn't want anybody to be misled by the theoretical figures that are on the current page in terms of their reprofiling. Any more to add, Councillor Donnelly, in summation?
No, thank you, Chair.
Any other points or questions from Cabinet? Fine. In that case, I would ask that you note the report and the recommendation to refer this to full council for our March meeting. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Question number 9. Agenda item number 9, acquisition programme to increase the supply of housing for temporary accommodation. Councillor Manro will go first, and I'll bring in Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. This report is asking for us to allocate a provision of £150 million for the purchase of temporary accommodation homes, which are much needed. Basically, the government, through its local housing allowance being frozen for many years, has caused major problems in terms of us being able to go into the private sector to actually try and source homes. We have bought homes, as you were, the last one we did was Aspect House, where we paid £7.5 million for 31 temporary accommodation homes, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and even 3-bedroom. Those are high quality homes that are being used for temporary accommodation. What we're trying to do now is to see whether we can go out into the market. With the market being distressed, i.e. private developers not being able to sell private sector homes, we can maybe get much better and more financially viable deals to actually buy those homes and then turn them over to temporary accommodation. But I would point out that we have to make sure, as our Section 151 officer says, they have to be financially sound. They have to, the rent has to cover the cost of the loan that we use to borrow. And if we use grants, it does have to financially be sound. But I would point out the costs at the moment on the homelessness is massive. For instance, using hotel rooms, it costs us £4,000 plus a month, which is £50,000 a year for one hotel room. And we're currently using 169. We're also using bed and breakfasts, which costs us 1,300 and something pounds per month. So the overspend on hotel rooms alone, if it carries on at this rate, will be over £5 million. So it's an absolute disaster that the Tory government's caused for us in terms of private landlords pulling out of the market, supply of housing drying up because people are not building. So we have to do many, many different things. And it's really important. I mean, I get emails, and I think Councillor Mahfouz gets emails where families are being moved from one hotel to another every week with children. And it's not a life that anybody would want our residents to have to live in. And we have to extend them all over the country as well, in terms of people having to be moved out of the borough. Education is affected, and all the things that make for a family life, support networks get disrupted and all the rest of it. So it's vitally important we try and get a source of housing that is, you know, people can live in, it's affordable, and it's, you know, whilst they're in temporary accommodation, it shouldn't be bed and breakfasts and hotel rooms. And we've not used bed and breakfasts and hotel rooms for many years, but we've had to go to that because what's happened with the economic vandalism that some prime ministers have caused in the recent few years. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to bring in Councillor Mahfouz. Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Munro rightly outlines the background as to why we are bringing this paper forward. And sadly, the Tories have pretended to be proud about claiming to be the party of home ownership, but they are currently the party of people losing their homes. We are seeing families being kicked out of their homes every single day. In fact, last year, we saw an approach of over 4,360 households approach us as for support with homelessness. And that is up obviously on previous years. And as Councillor Munro has rightly pointed out, we were in the very positive position of not having to put any families up in bed and breakfast or commercial hotels. But as this isn't just a problem confined to Ealing, this is a problem across the capital and across the country, where because of the economic mismanagement by the Tories and which has led to, and let me just put those figures, sort of nearly half of the private rented sector has been taken off the market, nearly half. And of those that are left, roughly 1 in 50 properties are within what is the local housing allowance, so what it would be covered off by housing benefit or its equivalent in terms of universal credit. That's leaving families absolutely reeling
trying to just put a roof over their head for themselves and for their children, and they are turning up on our doorsteps, and we are trying to do our best. And this paper is pushing forward a proper solution for that. We want to be on the front foot rather than having to be on the back foot, dealing with the mess that the Tories are putting everybody in. And so that ambitious, significant investment of up to £150 million to purchase up to 300 properties in, as Councillor Manro points out, a financially viable and appropriate way in each and every one of those purchases that need to be made, but increasing supply and being interventionist, because quite frankly, the private sector and under the situation that the Tories have left us in is completely pulled out of where it should be. So this is when we've got families emailing and on the phone and crying about their situation, we can't just sit there and wait for the Conservative government to do something, because they are not. All they're doing is making the situation worse. This paper is pushing forward how we are, as a Labour administration, seeking to resolve this awful, awful situation.
Councillor Gallants.
Thank you, Chair. So the report obviously centres around the paucity of properties available to rent. Would it not be a good idea to streamline the landlord licensing application process, given the significant backlog in the processing of applications? And I've got another question, if I may, on 4.16. It talks about the establishment of a new resettlement team. Now, will this work in parallel with, or will it replace Housing Solutions? Would it not be better to support more of the Housing Solution Department?
And I can see eyes sort of dotting across the room, because I think one of the questions advanced by Councillor Gallant seems to suggest that the reason that the housing market has collapsed has something to do with landlords having to fill out forms. So, Councillor Manro, Councillor Mahfouz, who would like to resolve that question?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this ridiculous suggestion that it's got anything to do with the private landlord licensing scheme. If that were the case, then this would be an isolated situation to only boroughs that have introduced a scheme. And I don't know if he's ever spoken to any other politician of any colour and responsible for any local authority anywhere in the country. And as I was on a call recently, and the first person to dissent was a Conservative cabinet member who said how awful the situation was, how their homelessness bill costs had gone through the roof, how the government needed to pull their finger out and do something about it, and to suggest that it's because of the private landlord scheme that we've introduced is first and foremost absolutely ridiculous. Secondly, actually the scheme that we've introduced has been very positively responded to by private landlords across the borough, with a higher than expected uptake of the scheme, which shows that a really good level of responsible landlords that are out there who are signing up to the scheme, and those who have signed up are not impacted by this. They'll be waiting for their application to be processed, but actually their application is submitted. And as I said at the full council a few weeks back, is that when they do get their license issued to them, they will have that issued for the commensurate amount of time, and so there will be no disbenefit to the landlords who are still waiting for that decision to be made. And the reality is, Councillor Gallant may not want to face it, but there was the worst Prime Minister in the history of this country coming in for 45 days and absolutely wrecking the economy, pushing mortgage bills through the roof, families and landlords having to pay an extra potentially £500 or more a month on their bills. That's pushed up rents for their tenants by at least £500 more a month or so. Rents have gone sky high. Many of those landlords are saying, actually, it's just not worth me being in this sector anymore, and therefore I'm just going to sell up and move on. It was an opportunity, of course, in Parliament recently for Michael Gove to stop no-fault evictions and protect these poor families who are just trying to pay for a roof over their heads by stopping no-fault evictions and out banning Section 21 notices. But actually, what do the Tories do? Absolutely chickened out of it, because do they care about these families? Do they care? No, not a jot. They've caused this crisis. They don't care about this crisis. And Councillor Gallant's question is an absolutely abomination and a slap in the face to those families who we speak to on a week-to-week basis and are facing the crisis that his government has caused.
The resettlement team as well.
Sorry, I mean, we've got the officers at the back in terms of sort of the operational side of things, if they want to, if anybody wanted to come in on that. But I think ultimately, you know, we're looking to make sure that we've got the best. In terms of the resettlement for asylum seekers. Again, the challenges here, as Councillor Gallant very well knows, is that the government policy has been all over the place in terms of lack of support for asylum seekers and refugees. Last year was a very turbulent time where they really were trying to stick it to newly identified refugees. So where people approach us for homelessness support, they are supposed to get 56 days of support before becoming homeless. For a newly identified refugee, so that's somebody who's been granted their status, it wasn't 56 days, it started off at 28. They reduced it to 7 days. And so let me just tell you, Cabinet, in 7 days, they're expecting somebody who didn't understand the British system, maybe wouldn't have necessarily the perfect command of English, to get themselves set up with a bank account, with a national insurance number, with the deposit for rent, for an application for universal credit, which would take 6 weeks to process for their first payment for their rent. And I could go on. So the reality is that many of those people, single people who weren't able to get support from the council because they're non-priority, would end up on the streets. So they couldn't put them on a Bibby Stockholm, they couldn't send them off to Rwanda. The government just thought, well, let's put them out on the streets. And the recent survey that we did across London of street homeless individuals across the capital showed that 20%, 1 in 5 of them, were people who were recently evicted from asylum hotels because there was nowhere else for them to go and they had no chance to sort their lives out because they were not given that chance to do so. What we've done locally is that we've got a really strong resettlement team who work really closely with them and with fabulous local charities who provide that support as well. And huge kudos to all of the work that they're doing. But yeah, so, you know, obviously we want to make sure that we're doing as much as possible to increase the supply across the board for all of those people who need that housing and that roof over their head. And this will form part of that.
Did you want to come back in, Councillor Manning?
Just wanted to, because if you'd read through the report, Councillor Gallant, you would have seen local housing allowance rates have been frozen for many years. That means we've had landlords who were housing council, we were leasing homes from them, and we were then putting temporary accommodation in those homes, i.e. families into temporary accommodation in the private sector. Those homes have been taken away because if you can get £1,900 a month for a 3-bedroom house in Greenford, and the local housing allowance only pays about £1,100, you can see what that whole problem has done that the government's created in terms of changing taxation on landlords and also the increase in interest rates for private landlords. They either leave the market or they leave us and go into the private market and get £1,900 a month. And most of our tenants can't afford because housing benefit will not pay for that kind of level of rent that's allowed. So it really is all down to central government that's causing this major problems. And as we know locally, many other councils are now actually declaring 114 notices because their homelessness budgets just gone over the top and they can't afford to actually pay for those budgets, some smaller councils. And you can see from the report that our spending is shooting up and it will carry on going up. So we will have an issue as well. So I think that's the reality of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Manro. Councillor Malcolm has a question.
Thank you, Chair. We support the approach in this report for the many of the reasons given tonight. Mine's question is about the timing of it. So it's profiled over the next 2 years in paragraph 8.2, which does seem quite soon for that sort of volume. Can I ask if you believe that to be achievable, how will you ensure that actually happens? Because that's quite tough.
I'll invite Councillor Manro and Councillor Mahfouz to answer that question. Councillor Malcolm, just so long as you give me a commitment that at the next cabinet meeting, you're not going to ask the question, why has it happened too slowly? Because your questions on timeframes over the last few cabinet meetings have been quite interesting in your critique of us either moving too quickly or too slowly. So who would like to answer that question? Councillor Manro.
So, Councillor Malcolm, look, the need is now, it's immediate. There's 169 families in bed and breakfast. There's 389 in bed and breakfast, 169 in commercial hotels. If we do not do something quickly, the bill for commercial hotels alone will be over £5 million, right? So we're going out into the market to see whether we can buy blocks of flats. So if we could buy a block of flats, say with 200 homes in it, you could get that done and get it done quickly. But we also have to build up a pipeline of developments coming forward that deliver us the target that we need. But it is immediate. There are families now in hotel rooms being moved every week from hotel to hotel. Their school lives are disrupted. So we have to move quick. We may not succeed, but we are absolutely determined to do what we can to get the homes that we need. But we have to do it prudently and financially make sure that it makes sense for the council to do those purchases. But speed is of the essence if he can do it.
Councillor Mahfouz.
Yeah, I won't add much. I think the point here is that, you know, we are proactively looking to resolve this situation by tabling this significant amount of money, this ambitious proposals that we're trying to do. But of course, every single one of those purchases need to be, you know, good value for money. Make sure that we're getting that return on that investment. Not only obviously in terms of providing a roof over the heads of the families that we're looking after, but equally also importantly in terms of obviously making sure that we are getting that return because we're spending public money as you would expect us to do. And so we'll need to take that balanced approach going forward. But yeah, we have taken this issue by the horns. We are absolutely making sure that we're determined to fix it locally, and we're very keen to crack on and do that.
Yeah, and on the prudence point, you know, we purchased a block of flats that contained 31 flats for 7 million. If you just run the numbers on a, you know, straight down the line, those flats were purchased at deep discounts to what is currently out there in the wider market. And we were able to do that because as a council, we have the ability to access both funding from the GLA, our ability to use our own money to take advantage, quite frankly, of some of those deep discounts. And in another scenario, in another committee that usually meets in this space, you know, much of the public commentary actually quite rightly focuses on how too much of our property market involves foreign speculators purchasing off-plan flatted developments that invariably end up going into the private rented sector. And yes, in certain circumstances, Councillor Gallant, landlords having to fill out a few forms to ensure that they're regulated to the extent that they should be and that they are quality and decent homes. Fundamentally, what we're saying as a council is if those assets are distressed, as we know they are, and as developers can't sell those flats either to the UK market or internationally, then we'll step in and we'll take some deep discounts, not just to ensure that we've got people living in decent accommodation for temporary accommodation when they come to us when homeless, but actually it's a net benefit for the council because they will sit on our asset book and support the council's financial position. And I think that's an incredibly, and therefore it is an incredibly solid piece of work that officers have put together. I hope that the housing crisis that we're currently facing in the context of interest rates isn't here in 2 years' time. If it still is, millions more Brits will face the prospect of having their fixed term mortgages expire and having to spend hundreds, if not thousands of pounds more on mortgage payments. So one might argue that we do need to do this quickly because we hope to return to a situation where people can afford to put a roof over their head, whether they're renting, whether they're buying, or indeed if they face the terrible circumstances of having to be in temporary accommodation. So I look to the rest of Cabinet to see if there are any points or questions. I don't believe there are. So if I could direct you to the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Thank you very much. We move to item number 10, the community schools admission arrangements for 2025-26. Councillor Nagpal.
Thank you, Chair. So as a council, we have a statutory duty to ensure sufficiency of school places. The community school admissions arrangements come to Cabinet to be approved by the 28th of February each year. This is also a statutory requirement, even if there are no changes from the previous year. So for the 2025-26 year, there are actually no changes from the previous year. So no proposed changes to the admissions criteria and no proposed changes to published admission numbers for Ealing's community schools.
And given it's a steady as they go report, I commend officers for preparing it. I don't believe I have any questions from councillors Malcolm or Gallant. I'll turn to Cabinet to see if there are any questions. I believe there are. So again, I direct you to the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Item number 11, the Gurnell Leisure Centre. Councillor Newstop.
Thank you. I'm delighted to bring this report forward. It really is the next stage of the delegations that we need to build the leisure centre on the site of Gurnell. And the specifics of it are that this delegation will take us to a pre-construction service agreement for the replacement of the leisure centre itself, but it will also allow us to move to the next steps for enabling us to award a development agreement for the residential development that will sit adjacent to the leisure centre. There are a number of other sort of legal bits that are being tied up in the report as well, and some useful appendix on the decision-making process for how we have decided to proceed with both of those two elements of the project that are inexorably tied but separate. So I welcome any further questions on it.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 345, the financial aspects, para 3. Now, it obviously admits there are still many uncertainties surrounding funding of this project, and there are high costs in the very early stages, such as demolition of the existing site. Are you not concerned that delegating so much authority, when, as per the key recommendations of the report, will actually remove the Gurnell project from useful public scrutiny?
Not at all. I mean, we have further delegations that will be required and further reports that will be forthcoming. We're doing a lot of our aspects very much in the public domain in terms of discussing very openly and transparently with residents the challenges that a project like this has. We've just discussed in great detail how difficult it is to build and the challenges in the housing market related to increased interest rates and other. And I would say that while this is not an easy project to deliver, it is front and centre of our ambitions as an administration, and we will do everything we can to minimise the borrowing costs that the project will inevitably require. And we'll do that through delivering really high quality housing that's appropriate for the area, and looking at other enabling development where we can. But also ensuring that we build something that really has longevity in terms of the revenue that we will be able to command from what will be a state-of-the-art, fantastic facility for all of our residents. So no, I hope that there's certainly no desire to obfuscate, quite the opposite. I think we're being very upfront about how difficult some of these projects are to deliver, particularly in the national context of leisure centres shutting down. But that and rising costs and so on, but that doesn't diminish our desire and our absolute dedicated conviction that we can and will deliver something for the people of Ealing.
Thank you very much. And to be absolutely clear and be in no uncertain terms ahead of no doubt a concocted attempts to call this decision in on the basis of the lack of clarity for future decision making. Future reports will come to Cabinet, not least in terms of the budget, but also in future Gurnell reports. So, that's on the public record. I'm making it very clear that that's on the public record. future reports on Gurnell will continue to come to Cabinet. Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions about this topic. Have the officers or yourself as a portfolio holder looked at a less enhanced leisure centre and landscaping scheme, taking into account the finances that may differ from this proposal? How viable is the eatery, given that there is a real bad problem with the climate of the hospitality sector across the whole country, never mind in London? So one is about the viability of that part of the proposal. And lastly, at the previous stage, there were a lot of groups who had disagreements with the proposal. Is this still the case?
Councillor Newstub, would you like to tell us why we're not just simply digging a hole in the ground and filling it with water?
I mean, honestly, this has been a long-term project, so that's starting to feel appealing. But no, I mean, I think I kind of alluded to that earlier, Councillor Malcolm. I mean, it is a project that it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance to build something fantastic for our residents. The idea that we would diminish our ambition for them at this stage by building something cheaper seems a hugely missed opportunity. And as I also mentioned earlier, the better the resources, the better the facilities we put into it, the better our chances of recouping the cost of building it are. Now, I am a member of a local gym, and that gym has something like 4,500 members. There is a huge need and desire for people to have great gym spaces, places where they can eat and enjoy things, and also to enhance our green spaces, particularly in that area. So no, I don't think there's any risk that we play by being really ambitious for the project. I think I've answered all of your questions there, so thank you. And sorry, there was the final one, which was, what was that one? Apologies.
I think maybe talk us through the extensive engagement that we've done through the Sounding Board and with other organisations in this field.
Thank you so much, Chair. And you would be absolutely right to say that the initial project going back some years now met with a great deal of local opposition and ultimately didn't achieve planning. In part for that reason, and lots of colleagues here were part of that decision. I wasn't, but I think it was the right thing to do. It obviously set us back, but I think if we'd gone ahead with building something like that in face of that opposition, we'd really not have done our residents proud. So we have been incredibly engaged with our local sounding board, which has invested people but local residents, to make sure that we are taking account of their needs and their concerns, and we have been incorporating them into the design and the ambitions for the site. And we have a series of drop-in events where people can meet the team coming up, as well as pop-up events at the site itself and all of our other leisure centres. And I think the entire tone of the project has been one of collaboration, cooperation and openness. And we've been able to, I hope, allay some of the concerns that local people have had, which in reality were mostly based on the height of the towers of the previous project, and to generate that real excitement that I hope that we all share around being able to deliver something quite so fantastic for Ealing.
And you know, the only thing I'd say, you know, the only thing to add here is that of course there's going to be disagreement. You know, there are going to be elements of any proposal. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a leisure centre, a housing development, or indeed a budget, or indeed a cabinet report, that people are going to disagree over. And I think the distinction, however, of course, is the compromise that we reach. You know, there's a disagreement here today. The Labour administration want to build a 21st century state-of-the-art leisure centre that has the ability to last into the decades into the future. That has all the things that a modern leisure centre needs, from the ability to socialise all the way through to wet play and all of the other facilities that it needs. If what the Liberal Democrats are suggesting is that they don't want to deliver any of that and simply, you know, a pool in a shed, then I doubt very much that the people of Ealing will think that that's a sensible decision, specifically given that our ambition, as Councillor Newstub, you rightly point out, our ambition to deliver a 21st century state-of-the-art leisure centre will be its best possible chance of remaining commercially viable for the foreseeable future. Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. It was exactly on that point. I think let the record show at 5:40 p.m. on the 7th of February 2024, the official opposition party of Ealing declared its position on Gurnell Leisure Centre to be rebuilt as just a basic swimming pool in Perivale. So that is got to be absolutely the clearest thing I've ever heard from Councillor Malcolm at this meeting. And I think the records need to reflect that that is the level of ambition that the Lib Dems have for our leisure facilities in our borough. And I think people of Ealing should know that. What we're offering is an absolute everything that you stated there, and that really ambitious 50-metre pool and everything that's going to go with that, which is going to be exactly what people have been asking for. That the Lib Dems, the official opposition, are saying that they just want a basic pool at Gurnell.
Councillor Munro.
So, I mean, I understand the rationale that you try and indicate, but to have we went and visited the Britannia Leisure Centre, and from there we saw that if you have a centre which actually is really popular and is sustainable, you can actually make a surplus from it, which would help to pay the investment that would go into the leisure centre. But the point I wanted to make was we realised that the housing market is not in quite the place where we need it to be. So we've separated the building of the leisure centre to what might be the enabling development, which could come a little bit later, and it's separate. The buildings are separate, so there is no linkage between the housing and the leisure centre. So therefore, the leisure centre will be built first, and then we will move on to the enabling development a little bit later, because at the moment, quite frankly, prices for land to build houses on is very, very low, and nobody wants to buy it. So we have to do that, but we will cash flow it. So later on, the enabling development will help fund the leisure centre, but they're not linked. We will do the leisure centre separately first.
Okay. Any other points or contributions from members of the Cabinet? I don't believe that there are. And again, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm sure you can see both in the appendices of this report and also the many reports that have now come to Cabinet on Gurnell, that there is full feasibility studies and testing on all manner of ranges of configurations of Gurnell. Indeed, I vividly recall doing a Threadmageddon in which I took those designs directly from the architecture reports and shared them with the people of Ealing, so that they could also see very clearly what the current specification of Gurnell is versus the ones that we were proposing at that Cabinet report and are now proposing in this. So once again, a vexatious call-in by the opposition parties for something that clearly is in both the papers and has been discussed here at Cabinet today. I would suggest would be unwise on behalf of the opposition. But I anticipate all things at all times. So I ask Cabinet to note the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed at all time. Agreed. Thank you very much. Question number. Item number 12, second mistake. Housing Revenue Account, HRO Business Plan 2024-2025. Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. So unlike the budget that was the paper that was set beforehand, this is actually seeking to agree the budget for the Housing Revenue Account, which of course sits ring-fenced and separate to the main council budget. It sets both the proposals for next financial year, but also the wider 30-year business plan, which of course has been reviewed independently as well. Some of those external pressures that we're facing, again, similar to my colleagues across London who I speak to, facing a significant challenge in terms of obviously wanting to make sure that we're meeting the increased levels of regulation that are absolutely right, and the scrutiny under the regulator for social housing and housing ombudsman. But of course, as we've talked throughout so much of this evening, the increased costs of inflation and interest rates, which are impacting both our tenants, but also the housing revenue count as well. So this year, we will unashamedly, we will have to spend significant amount of reserves, as other boroughs are doing, in order to balance those books, but that is not a sustainable position. And so we will seek to get close to balancing those books for next financial year and to balance them beyond that point. In doing so, we have priorities as to how we've made sure that we will have a business plan and a budget that seeks to prioritise and deliver for the safety of our residents across all of our properties. We want to make sure that we are great at tenant engagement, and we want to improve the services and outcomes for our residents as well. And of course, we want to also, you'll see there, significant capital investment into our stock as well to maintain and improve our homes. So at that point, I'll stop because I think there's some questions and certainly come back if there's anything further.
Councillor Gillans.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, one of the things you're asking for approval of is a 7.7% increase in tenant rents. That's for council properties. Now, council is the biggest landlord, as I understand it. Will that have an effect? And apologies if it's slightly off the topic, but will it have an effect on housing association rents in Ealing? Will they do the same? And would any disparity have any effect on tenant placements?
Sure. So housing associations decide their own increases in rents, but almost every single housing provider that I've spoken to will be going for the 7.7%. Because they're all under the same pressures to make those investments in their homes, to make them safe and secure, to bring living standards up to where they should be. And so in terms of comparison, we are still below the target rent levels that we should be at as a local authority, and our rent levels are still on average lower than those boroughs around us. So, and they are certainly lower than housing association rents, which are at a higher level as well. To give you an idea of what average tenants will be paying, if they are paying, of course, the full amount, which many of our residents will be supported in different ways in order not to during this cost of living crisis, but it would be equivalent of about £500 per calendar month. And if we go back to the conversations that we've having before, an average 2-bedroom property in a place like Northolt and Greenford would certainly be far in excess of that £500 in the private rented sector, which is actually still by far and away most of people who are renting in the borough are renting in the private sector. And as I say, over half of our tenants will be provided with support either through full or partial housing benefit to cover the costs of their rent as well.
And of course, it's worth mentioning and reminding Councillor Gallant that the rent increase would not be going up to the point of 7% had it not been for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the economic vandalism that they've inflicted on this country through the context of both interest rates and inflation rate rises that have had consequential impacts on the HRA in terms of the contracts for repairs and maintenance and for health and fire and safety and for all of the other things that the council needs to pay for in order to deliver safe, genuinely affordable homes for our residents. If you have concern with that figure, then I would urge you to make recommendations to your party in government. So thank you very much. Any other points, or I think we're okay. Let's make progress. So unless there is anything else, I'd ask Cabinet to refer themselves to the recommendations in the report and ask that they're agreed. Moving to item number 13, the Mattock Lane Safer Zone Public Space Protection Order, Councillor Anand.
Thank you, Chair. The Mattock Lane Safe Zone PSPO was introduced in the area surrounding the MSI Reproductive Choices Clinic almost 6 years ago. So the PSPO was designed to address behaviours found to have been having a detrimental effect on women assessing the clinic, as well as their families and support network, clinic staff and residents living in and passing through the area. It's been in force since April 2018 and has already been renewed once in February 2021. The PSPOs can last only for a maximum period of 3 years. So Ealing Safe Zone PSPO is due to expire in April this year, unless we take a decision to renew it. Chair, we will recall the evidence we considered when we took the decision to introduce this order in April 2018, and then we took the decision to renew the order in 2021 as well. So we have read and heard the testimony from women and their families and from council officers who witnessed the behaviours firsthand. And we know the very real and damaging effect the behaviours at the clinic gates that were happening. All of this evidence is presented again this evening within the appendices in the report. In devising the order, the council were careful to consider all equalities issues and to balance competing human rights. Of the ways we balanced those competing rights was to include a designated area approximately 150 meters from the clinic in which people can continue to congregate and engage in abortion-related prayer, vigil, and protest. Now, almost 6 years later, this area continues to be used almost every day by pro-life groups. Chair, in November 2023, we took the decision to begin a consultation on whether or not to renew our PSPO for a second time. This consultation lasted 8 weeks, and we received over 2,000 responses from members of the public, service users, key partners, including the Mayor's Office and the Metropolitan Police. The overwhelming response received was positive and in support of the renewal of the PSPO. Chair, therefore, I strongly support the renewal of the PSPO for a period of 3 years.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anand. I have a question from Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. The Lib Dems agree with this report as we did about 4 years ago, based upon the evidence we saw then and the new evidence from the consultation recently. My question relates to sort of legal obstacles. So when this is agreed in a few moments, do you foresee any legal obstacles, or will we just be allowed to sort of for it to continue for another 3 years, do you believe?
I think
Chairman? And then I could bring in Mr. Murray as well. So just to say, any decision to renew a PSPO, including the decision we're taking tonight, can be challenged in the High Court, and the council must always be prepared for such possibilities. But our PSPO has faced significant scrutiny in the High Court and the Court of Appeal, and we recognize our actions interferes with human rights, and the careful balancing act that we have undertaken as a council has been endorsed by the court. So I'm happy for Mr. Murray to come in to add anything on to the legal side.
Just to endorse what Councillor Anand said, that challenge is possible, but that challenge has happened previously, so and has had been withheld. So,
and Cabinet are asked to take the decision on the basis of the PSPO, mindful of that in the context of the report and the identified risks. So that's part and parcel of the decision that we're taking here today. Are there any questions or observations from any member of the Cabinet? Just once again let me first take the recommendation. So I direct you all to the recommendations that are in the report. Do you agree? Thank you very much. And I will, after having sort of taken the decision, I just want to put on record my thanks for the team for having to go through the process of renewal. Of course, it's entirely appropriate that we, on the weight of evidence, move forward to bring forward the renewal. Of course, there will be significant additional challenges, perhaps in the future, relating to the new statutory guidance that's currently out for consultation by the government on how indeed these zones should be policed. And Councillor Anand and I have made representations to the Home Office to encourage them to really rethink the nature of the guidance that they've issued, fundamentally on the basis, as we've put on the public record, that it will undermine an Act of Parliament. Which unfortunately is not something that should be countenanced. so I think it's important that we acknowledge that current situation. That I believe concludes the business of today's meeting. I don't have when we're meeting next, but I'm certain it's all in your diaries. So thank you very much. Good evening.